Hello and welcome to this Define Tomorrow 2021 session where we'll be looking at security and the whole way in which security has changed based on the fact that a lot of our data is no longer stuck in our data center and it's now all over the world in different places. Just to introduce myself, I'm Anthony Charman. I'm a Microsoft 365 adoption consultant. I had a big birthday recently, and I realised quite a frightening way that I've spent 38 years in the IT industry, having started off looking after an IBM System 34 a long time ago before the advent of the PC. So yes, they should. It's been an interesting journey. Things are changing all the time, but I've always had this one thing, one kind of adage in life, which was that we need to understand the problem before we go and try and find the solution for it. I really hate technology for technology's sake. So that's really what drives me through this industry. If you want to reach out to me, then you can get me on LinkedIn. I'm just there as Anthony Charman, and my Twitter, which I don't use as much as I probably should, is at Anthony Charman. So where do we start with this subject? And I'm going to start in that pre-cloud era because it was a much simpler world. Our data was held in a data center. It was usually a room inside an organization. Everything that we needed from an informational point of view was held on hard drives and things within that data center. And to be honest, when I started in IT, security was just locking the door in the evening. The only way people could get to that data was by getting through the door and getting into the computer room where the main information was stored, or by terminals, dumb terminals that were attached to cables that physically linked into that room and were in the local area. It really was a local area network that attached us to those devices. Then the internet came along and we had to put a connection out to the internet, and therefore we had to secure what was coming in and going out of that environment, and we could put a firewall there, and that would stop people who we didn't want coming in through that connection, and also enable us to control what people within our organization could connect to across the internet. It then started to get more complicated. We had other parts of the organization we wanted to link to, so we had wide area networks, and we had people who are working from various locations who needed to have a connection into our organization, and we had a VPN. Throughout this whole period, or starting to some of this period, then email became very popular. I can remember the first email that I sent off an IBM terminal. It was like magic, but it all of a sudden meant that we were able to communicate with people across the world very simply. But it also raised a lot of issues with security, because people would send us things with payloads that weren't appropriate, or content that wasn't appropriate. So we had to put things in place to enable us to control those. But it was very simple because the only connection into our organization excuse me, was the internet connection. So we could put point solutions on that. We could manage data leak protection by putting a box there that was monitoring what was going in and coming out. We could scan emails as they came in. We could filter what people were looking at on the internet. But we could just do that in one place because we only had one connection going outside of the organization. So that was the pre-cloud era. Not quite sure when that ended. I was going to try and find out when the first kind of cloud-based services became available, but I'm sure they were email solutions and other bits and pieces. We're now in the cloud era, and it's kind of crept up on us. No longer is our data just held in our data center. It's held all over the place. We're using workloads and applications in the cloud that is running on hardware that we have no control over, and therefore our information and where it's stored is kind of unknown to us. It's all over the place, and we've also got an increasing number of people accessing that information from coffee shops and from mobile devices. So we're having to think about the security of that information. And no longer is email the only way in which we communicate. We're now sharing files and co-authoring files across the internet with our partners, and other organizations, using things like SharePoint and OneDrive, and other kind of file sharing mechanisms. And therefore, we don't have control of the information and the documents that we have created ourselves. We've then got Microsoft Teams and its equivalents across other platforms, which means we're sharing information critical to our organizations, but it's sat in somebody else's cloud. In the Teams environment, it's sat in Microsoft's cloud. And another ways of communication in there as well. We've got chats, we've got team posts, we've got Yammer, all those kind of things. We also frequently don't have any control over the devices that are attaching to connect to that information. We've got our PCs and our mobiles. We've got people using tablets to access that information. They may be managed devices, but there's a big trend to have kind of bring your own device, or for employees to be able to use their own mobile phone to connect into to corporate email. So those solutions that we had in the old days, where we were able to just put a filter or put a device on our internet connection and monitor what was going in and out of our organization, just no longer work. We need alternative methods to secure our environments. So Microsoft 365 has a whole suite of security tools within it, and I'm just going to take you through very quickly some of those tools and the reason for them. There's a lot of complexity in configuring those tools, but it's really important to start with to understand what you're trying to protect in your business, and also the tools that are available from Microsoft to provide that protection. I'm going to start very, very quickly with endpoint protection, because we could do a whole seminar on endpoint protection in its own right. But clearly, those endpoints, so those PCs, those laptops, those mobile devices, are very vulnerable. They are probably the most common way that people will break into your network, because if they can get access and control of one of those devices, they can come into your organization almost as an authorized user. So things like antivirus, anti-malware, ensuring that you've got standards in your organization to do with length of passwords and use of PIN numbers, ensuring devices are encrypted, so if someone finds them, they can't access them, and if they do go to the point of taking the hard drive out of that device and loading it into another device, they still can't get hold of the information. These things are just so important. And these are covered very, very well within the Microsoft portfolio. So Microsoft Defender for Endpoint, which offers a lot of this functionality, has slowly been brought down in price and is starting to compete very effectively with a lot of the third-party solutions. And because it's part of a Microsoft security suite, it's got that centralized management, so you can sit in the middle of the organization and manage and control what's happening with your endpoints. The next area I'm going to look at is identity management. Now, in the old days, we would have a list of users on our central computer. We'd have probably a Microsoft Active Directory sat on our central computer, and that identifies who the user is by a username and password, and then it knows what resources, what files, and what applications within our organization that those people have access to. And that all made complete sense when we had a single IT system sat in a room somewhere with a local area network. One of the problems with that in the cloud-based environment is that you need to be able to connect into that central server. So you've got to give everyone access to your central resources there in that Active Directory server before you know who they are. So they've already come through your firewall, they've already come through your VPN, they've got to that area, and therefore it gives them a launch pad to get into other areas of your business and other servers that they may not have permission to, but it gives them the opportunity to try and break into those. So in a cloud-based environment, and in the cloud-based era, we do need a cloud-based identity management solution. So no longer is it good enough just to have our Active Directory. We need to embrace things like Microsoft's Azure AD. So that sits in the cloud. That is what will, when I log in to my Microsoft environment, if I go to office.com, doesn't know who I am until I hit the login button and it asks me to log in. And that then looks at that central database in the cloud to see who I am, does it recognize me, and what resources am I allowed access to. And those resources aren't just the resources within my organization, they are the cloud-based resources as well. So we can implement single sign-on in there. So if I have, say I have access to the finance application Sage, I can log into my Azure Active Directory. It will know who I am. It will know I have access to that Sage resource, which is on a third-party platform, and it can, in effect, kind of pass that authentication across to that organization, enabling me to access those resources as well. So it gives me that single sign-on ability. So username and password has been what we've used to access organizations and to access IT systems for a long time now. What we're seeing more and more is just that wasn't strong enough. There were lots of people using passwords that were easily guessed or easily broken into by brute force attacks. And that's where we've seen the advent of multi-factor authentication. That's me knowing my username, that's me knowing the password associated with that, but that's also me having a device, having something that proves, enters, creates another factor in the login process. So what we see a lot in Azure Active Directory and their multi-factor authentication is the fact that people will use either the MFA application or a text message to their phone or a voice message to their phone, which will give them the third bit of information that they need to be able to log in and access your resources. So it's it's an area which causes a lot of issues with users because they're not used to having to use this technology. But if you implement it carefully and considerably with the appropriate training, then people will adopt it and get used to it very soon. And we can set the parameters to make sure that we've got the levels of security that we want with the minimum of disruption to users. So once we've got our users into the organization, we need to make sure that we can control what they have access to and the kind of devices that they're accessing from. And this is where conditional access comes into it. It's part of the Microsoft Azure AD suite, and it enables us to do things like check for check a user's device, find out, is it patched to an appropriate level? Do they have the appropriate level of the operating system? Have they got the latest virus protection? Are they coming in from a location that we approve of, or are they coming in from somewhere where we don't really want them to access our systems? And we can control all of that within the Active Directory to make sure that that users are using devices that are safe, that are well protected before we allow them to access our systems. So yes, if they haven't fired up their laptop for some time and the virus protection is out of date, then it will insist that they refresh the the virus protection application to get the latest pattern files, etc., before it allows them into our organization. There's also some really clever stuff around which is available with the E5 licensing, which is kind of the risk-based stuff, which will allow, which will cope with situations where, it'll identify if someone's just logged in in Birmingham and then 20 minutes they log in from Beijing, it will identify that that was an impossible journey for them to have achieved, and will block them based on that basis. So some really, really clever stuff in there. Yet again, with all of these things, you need to do them in moderation. You need to look at the business requirement. You need to look at the level of protection that you need within, for your data, and configure those things appropriately to create the minimum amount of disruption to a user while providing the appropriate level of security for the data that they're accessing. Just an additional kind of element to that is what Microsoft call app enforced restrictions there. So that can enable us to provide different levels of access to the resources that we have within our IT systems based on the device they're accessing from. If it's a managed device, which is owned by the company and completely in control of the company, we can give them a different experience when they log in to an unmanaged device. So an example of that would be if I'm sat at home and I've got my Computer World laptop here, I get full access to all of the resources that I need to, and I can get into the SharePoint system and I can use it in a very interactive way. If, however, I was using it on my MacBook Pro, which is not a device controlled by the organization, then I can be limited to just get a read-only access to that SharePoint database. So that's just another way in which we can put layers of security into how I can access data and information and resources in the system based on the device that I'm coming from. So I mentioned data loss prevention before, and in the old kind of pre-cloud era, that was a matter of putting a box on our internet connection that would look at emails and look at the data that's going up and down that connection and make sure that I'm not sending things outside of the organization that my organization doesn't want me to send out. It's just a completely different gambit when we're talking about cloud-based solutions. By Exchange email, which would have traditionally been on site, now sits in the cloud. So if I'm sending an email if I'm sat in my organization and I'm sending an email, or if I'm outside the organization and I'm sending an email, that email's never getting stored on anything within my organization. If I email here from home to someone else who's working from home, it goes through the Exchange Online server, and it would never go through the internet that we have it back into our head office in Bristol. Also, SharePoint, if I am using that, or if I'm using a OneDrive account, it's going nowhere near my internet connection at the office. So there's no point in monitoring just information at that point there. Also, therefore, we need to have a different solution. A Microsoft DLP, or data loss prevention, offers that functionality. It enables us to monitor our email wherever we are and wherever it's transitioning from. It enables to monitor the contents of our SharePoint sites as they are being sent around to our users. And it gives us a lot of control over how information is traveling outside of our organization, as well as within our organization. We can monitor that and say, look, if it's financial information, if it's a credit card number and it's got a date on it and it's got the CVC code on it, then I want to block that communication because that's not an appropriate way for us to be using that kind of sensitive financial information. If it's things like people's driving license numbers, if it's like people's national insurance numbers, we can block those so that information containing those can't be sent outside of the organization. And there are lots and lots of predefined templates for that kind of information. But in addition to that, we can say we want to monitor custom word lists, and we want to make sure that maybe, and the example I'll show in a minute is we don't want anyone in our organization talking about our new products with people outside of the organization. So we can create those custom word lists and manage those, and we can monitor those. And we can through centralized reporting, we can see what's going on. We can allow people to justify what they're doing, or we can completely block that type of thing. So just on my next slide, I've just got a screenshot here of a demonstration of that. I'm using this as Anthony Charman internally, and I'm talking to my external account here. And I've just said, look, I've just found out the name of a new product. Do you want to know? And I'm going to tell someone outside of the organization. And just because our demo environment is based on chocolate and not on IT, because our marketing manager says that chocolate's far more interesting than than IT, then we've set up this demonstration based on that. And I've just sent in a little message there saying, our new product's going to be called Smarties. That's a custom word that's been blocked, and therefore that message doesn't get sent to that end user. And it does give me the options here. What can I do? And I can control the options that people have from the central DLP policy to say, what can they do? If I click on that button there, it would actually, in this scenario, give me the opportunity to put a short justification in that will be recorded in the audit logs, or and therefore, I'm going to be held accountable for why I sent that information outside of the organization. So that's data loss protection. That's a very simple demonstration of what can be done in that area. And yet again, as I will repeatedly say, with these things, we need to go back to the business, understand how important that data is, understand our liability, understand the compliance frameworks that we're working in, and therefore, based on those, create and configure data loss prevention policies to be appropriate to the way in which we need to protect our data. So the next thing that we're going to look at is how we can use a product, an element of Microsoft 365 called Azure Information Protection to label our documents. So we have lots of different types of documents and lots of emails within our organizations. Some of those we don't mind where they go. We're happy for them to go out to people outside of the organization. We're happy for someone outside of the organization to then forward them on to someone else. But what Azure Information Protection allows us to do is to select a label for our document or for our email, which classifies it in a different, as a type of content, and then control where that content can go to. And that label travels with the email inside our organization, but also as we send it outside of the organization. So it goes with that document wherever it goes. So I can create an email and I can say, look, I'm going to classify this as confidential or client confidential. I only want that email to go outside of the organization to that client, and that particular client. I'm not going to allow them to forward it anywhere else, and I'm going to to have that control over it. Now, this doesn't only work in a Microsoft environment. If I was to send that email to a Google email address, it would still work, because every time they go to open that email or that file that I've sent to them, it refers back to the central information protection repository and says, is this person allowed to open this email? And until that point, the email that they've received is encrypted. So they cannot open that email without it going back to that digital rights management server sat in the middle of Azure, and asking whether they can open that email at all. And that really means that we've got full control over that information. Yes, we can let anyone open that. Yes, we can let those people who I've sent the email to forward it to other people. And I can let them open it for the rest of time, or I can control it. I can get it to put some physical detail on it, like a footer or a header or a watermark. I can make sure I can lock it so they can't forward it to anyone else. I can actually control how long they can have that, how long they can open that email for. So I can say it's only accessible for them for the next 30 days. I can actually go and revoke that email from them at any moment that I want to, so they can no longer open that email. That gets over that embarrassing thing when people in Exchange, Microsoft Exchange, have sent an email to someone by mistake, and they use that recall function, which is just an instant flag to anyone who receives that. I would like to recall that email. Is an instant flag to say, go and have a look. It might be quite interesting. In this case, we can actually stop their access to that. So I've just put a quick screenshot on here, which shows what it looks like within. This is in Microsoft Word, so I've got my Microsoft 365 panel questions that I've been working on for the panel that we're doing as part of Define Tomorrow. But you can see through the Azure Information Protection Client, I've got the ability to set the classification of that document, whether it be a personal document, all the way through those classifications to client confidential. And I can change that one there if I have to. If I want to downgrade a classification, I've got to provide a justification. But from the moment that I send that email, that label is or that Word document is saved. That document label goes with it wherever it is, and only can be modified in an audited environment. And there's that centralized reporting again. I can see who's sent those emails out, who's modified them, etc. So I can control information inside and outside of my organization. Just going to pick up on two more things before we finish. The first one is document retention. One of the biggest security risks that we have as organizations is the documents and the files that we're storing and the liability they may be to us from a compliance point of view. Just, a lot of organizations, when we start on this security journey and we start talking about document retention, it's very clear that they've probably, since the beginning of their IT systems, never deleted a document. And there's, they've just continually allowed their document stores to grow. They're backing them up every night, which means they've probably got a much bigger backup solution than they really need. And what they don't realize is that holding on to documents that you don't need is still a liability because of the content that is within them. So it's a good idea to look and review your document retention. It starts with a business project. They're looking about how long you need to hold on to these things. There may be documents that there's kind of two aspects to documentation and to document retention. The first one is, am I holding on for things too long? Or the other one is really, are there things that I need to hold on to for longer, and I need to make sure that they're not deleted, so that they are there in case there's some kind of legal case or a subject access request come in that I really should have been holding that information for. So all of the mechanisms are in there within the Microsoft environment to manage your document retention. It makes things a lot easier if you can get hold of stuff. It certainly is something you should consider when you start to look at your storage plans and how you start to move stuff off your on-premises storage into cloud-based storage, because when you move into cloud-based storage, you're paying for it on the basis of how much you're holding. So it's a great opportunity when you start to do an on-premise to cloud migration of data to look at this. And there's a very, very comprehensive solution there in Microsoft 365 to enable you to manage that across emails, across SharePoint sites, across your OneDrive, and across all of the other aspects, so Teams and Teams communities. Just another kind of aspect to the Microsoft 365 tools, and this is really the kind of the reason that we put this in place, is that there's a great e-discovery solution in there. It's been enhanced a lot recently, and I know it's an area that's getting lots of attention from Microsoft. But because now our information is held in so many different places, we still need that one central tool for when those subject access requests come in, so that we can set off a search on content that will cover all of the areas and all of the places that we're sharing data, whether that be our on-premises data or our cloud-based content. And that is a very, very comprehensive solution and well worth taking a look at. And the organizations I've worked with, especially in the public sector, have been absolutely amazed about how much time that has saved them, being able to fire off one search across the whole environment, rather than what they've been doing now, which is kind of searches into lots of different areas of data, and never really confident that they've captured everything that they should do as part of their requirements in that area. So that's all I've got to say. Just to summarize, the cloud-based era has introduced some significant new security challenges. But Microsoft, as you would imagine, have got products to address those. We look very quickly at endpoint protection. We've discussed identity management, the things that are available in conditional access and app enforced restrictions, what data loss prevention looks like in the cloud-based era, where we can no longer have a point solution sat on our firewall and internet connection, and at Azure information protection and how that can help you protect data, not only when it's inside your organization, but also when it's you've sent it to other people. We had a quick look at data retention. Always, it's simple concepts, but quite a complex project. But it does offer some significant benefits and does significantly reduce costs of the storage if you can get rid of old data, and also your liability for the content that's held in that data. And then we just touched on the e-discovery elements of Microsoft 365, which can save organizations vast amounts of times because it can comprehensively search all of your data, both on premises and wherever it's stored across the internet. So just next steps as we finish, I go back to my old adage: it's important to understand the solution, the problem before designing the solution. It's very, I make it very clear, this isn't a technology project. If these the kind of decisions about these security tools is being left to the IT department, then, and if you're a senior manager in an organization, you're thinking IT have got this sorted, and it's just about them configuring a product, then you need to think again, because it's a business project. You need to think about that data. You need to think about how you're going to categorize it, how important it is to you, what compliance frameworks do you need to work under to be legal. And therefore, if you're thinking of any of those issues and looking at any of those issues or concerned about them, then do give us a call. Do contact myself or your account manager within Computer World, and book a cloud security review. We can show you what's possible, and we can just start to talk to you about the scope of a project to start to bring your security back in line in a cloud-based environment. They're my contact details. I hope you found this session useful, and I hope you find the rest of Define Tomorrow useful as well. My colleague Ollie Restorick will be doing some more kind of demonstration-based presentations of some of the technology that we've looked at here. So if you want to know more and want to know more from a technical side, then do pick up on his presentations. And hope you enjoy the whole of the conference. Thank you very much.